Who was the violinist Henryk Wieniawski? Henryk Wieniawski was a virtuoso violinist and composer whose music has been recorded by the greatest virtuosi of the violin. He lived from 1835 to 1880. Wieniawski was regarded amongst the most distinguished violinists in history and was the archetypal wandering musician with non-stop concert tours and rapport with the audience as his abiding passion. Henryk Wieniawski's father, Tobias Pietruszka, born Wolf Hellman, was the son of a Jewish barber named Herschel Meyer Hellman from Lublin's Jewish neighborhood of Wieniawa. Wolf Hellman later changed his name to Tadeusz Wieniawski, taking on the name of his neighborhood to blend into the Polish environment. The oldest child in the family was Henryk's half-brother from Tadeusz Wieniawski's first marriage to Eva Feder. Henryk also had younger twin brothers, Joseph and Alexander, and the three youngest of the Wieniawski children, Adam, Kajetan and Konrad, died in their first year. Prior to obtaining his medical degree, Wieniawski's father had converted to Catholicism. He married Regina Wolf, the daughter of a noted Jewish physician from Warsaw, and out of this marriage, Henryk was born. Henryk Wieniawski was born in Lublin in present-day Poland. His younger brother Joseph Wieniawski and nephew Adam Tadeusz Wieniawski were also accomplished musicians, as was his daughter Regine, who became a naturalized British subject upon marrying into the peerage and wrote music under the name Podolski. The Wieniawski home was steeped in piano music, particularly the music of Chopin. Yet Henryk chose not to become a pianist like his mother. Instead, he developed an interest in the violin. When he was 5, Henryk was initiated into the secrets of the violin by Jan Hornziel, who was an experienced musician and teacher and a former pupil of Louis Spohr. In Warsaw, Henryk transferred to Stanislaw Serachiewski, another famous Lublin violin teacher, who also taught Henryk's older colleague, Joseph Joachim. Henryk made amazing progress on the violin and gave his first solo public appearance at the age of 7. His talent for playing the violin was recognized early, and in 1843 he was accepted by the Paris Conservatoire and taught by Lambert Massart, where special exceptions were made to admit him as he wasn't French and was only 8 years old. He attended the Conservatoire from 1843 to 1846 and returned for another year in 1849. At that time, the Conservatoire only accepted pupils aged 12 years and over, and even then only French nationals. Strenuous efforts were made on Henryk's behalf, and he was granted an exception. On the 28th of November 1843, Wieniawski was enrolled by special decree as number 468 on the pupils' register at the Conservatoire. Le Petit Polonais, as he became known, proved himself an exceptional pupil, and Massart therefore gave him a great deal of extra attention. At the end of 1845, Daniel Aubert, the director of the Conservatoire, wrote the following report, signed by the other teachers. Our highest hopes in Mr. Massart's special violin class rest in young Wieniawski, aged 10 years and 4 months. Henryk Wieniawski graduated from there with the first prize in violin at the unprecedented age of 11. He was declared the outright winner and thereby the youngest graduate in the Conservatoire's history, up until that time. His highly talented younger brother Joseph also studied at the Conservatoire, and Edward Wolff, a pianist and respected professor at the Paris Conservatoire, was his uncle, the brother of his mother Regina. Henryk had already met Frédéric Chopin in Paris, and these encounters with the gods of Polish culture cannot have failed to have left a strong impression on the young musician's sensitive nature. On the 30th of January 1848, Henryk gave a recital in the Saxe Concert Hall with his brother Joseph and his uncle Edward Wolff, and then bade farewell to Paris for a whole year. Henryk Wieniawski basically became a concert violinist at age 13. After graduation, he toured extensively and gave many recitals, where he was often accompanied by his brother Joseph on piano. In 1847, he published his first opus, a Grand Caprice Fantastique, the start of a catalogue of 24 opus numbers. His appearances at the Tsar of Russia's court were met with great acclaim. In 1848, the famous Belgian violinist Henri Vieuxtemps commented, "There is no doubt that this child is a genius, for at his age it would otherwise be impossible for him to play with such passionate feeling, and moreover with such understanding and such a well-conceived plan." Henryk became the darling of the St. Petersburg elite and was received in the salons of aristocrats and patrons of the arts, where he often gave improvised concerts with his hosts. Wieniawski went to Dresden, then under the patronage of the famous Hungarian pianist Franz Liszt. Wieniawski appeared twice in Weimar. He then passed through Berlin, Hamburg, where he gave a concert, and then returned back to Paris. The tour had been extremely valuable to Wieniawski in that it enriched his artistic experience and enabled him to make contact with many prominent artists. The Wieniawski brothers gave various joint concerts in Paris, which met with the delight of audiences and critics alike. At age 15 and his brother Joseph aged 13, the Wieniawski brothers now embarked on a mammoth 2-year tour of the territories of Russia and the Baltic lands, together giving close on 200 concerts in huge cities as well as provincial towns, everywhere delighting the audiences and critics. During his concert tour of 1851 to 1852, Wieniawski made many compositions, for example, the Adagio Elegiac Opus 5, the Concert Fantasia Souvenir de Moscou Opus 6, the Capriccio Valse Opus 7, and in Russia, Wieniawski began work on his first violin concerto. Several other compositions from the period are lost. In Vienna in 1853, Wieniawski gave the first performance of one of his most popular miniatures, the Kujawiak, and also his variations on the Austrian national anthem, a piece which later became part of the collection of caprices, Opus 10. And in Leipzig, in the Gewandhaus in October 1853, The premiere of Henryk Wieniawski's recently completed and still unpublished First Violin Concerto in F-sharp minor, Opus 14, took place, with a critic from the Signaler für die Musikalische Welt reporting that the audience was electrified, and the reporter with them. In 1854, he continued his tour in Bavaria, beginning with concerts in Munich. He performed in Brussels in 1855. And in that same year in Paris, he had the opportunity to present and dedicate his composition, the Scherzo Tarantelle Opus 16, to Professor Massart, his old teacher. At the end of October 1858, Wieniawski travelled to London, thus opening up an important new chapter in both his professional and his personal life. His playing in London was very popular and much admired, and he engaged in chamber music with the Beethoven Quartet Society, in which Wieniawski played alongside the finest musicians of the day, Heinrich Wilhelm Ernst, Joseph Joachim and Alfred Piatti. In April of that year, Henryk's friend Anton Rubinstein had introduced him to the Hampton family, and Henryk met their daughter Isabella. The two young people fell deeply in love. Isabella's mother, Elizabeth, was in favour, but her father, who had respect for musicians but knew a thing or two about them, was opposed to the match and instead wanted his daughter to marry a man with a solid financial background. History has it that Mr. Hampton's resistance to the marriage was broken when he heard the legende that Henryk had written under Isabella's spell. So eventually Mr. Hampton consented to allow his daughter Isabella to marry Henryk Wieniawski. In November 1859, Wieniawski wrote to his Brussels impresario, "I don't know whether you've heard that I wish to marry a young English woman who I love more deeply than the finest Stradivarius or Guarneri." In 1860, Wieniawski was appointed court soloist in St. Petersburg, an assignment which lasted around 9 years. He married Isabella Hampton in Paris at the Church of St. Andrew. Anton Rubinstein led the bride to the altar, Gioacchino Rossini was a witness, and Henri Vieuxtemps played the violin during the ceremony. The newlyweds then travelled from Paris to London to receive the blessing of Isabella's parents, then went on to Lublin to see Henryk's parents. Then passing through Warsaw, where they bade farewell to their friends, they set off for their new destination, St. Petersburg. It was during his years of employment at the St. Petersburg court that Wieniawski composed his most mature works. Some examples are the Obertas and the Dudziarz, or Bagpiper, the Polonaise in A major, Opus 21, and his second violin concerto in D minor, Opus 22. Its first version had been written in 1862, but the subsequent improved concerto was published in its final version in 1870. London was a frequent stop on Wieniawski's vacation travels, and he gave concerts there in 1861, 1864, and annually between 1866 and 1869. In 1872, Wieniawski bade farewell to Russia and went to America on the 31st of August, setting sail from Liverpool to New York. And then on the 23rd of September 1872 began a marathon tour of the US. In the course of 8 months, they were to give 215 concerts in 60 cities of the eastern states. After that, Wieniawski stayed on a whole extra year, giving concerts in California and in other western states and in Mexico. He was particularly warmly received in California. To show his gratitude to the Californian audiences, he wrote and dedicated to them a new composition, Souvenir de San Francisco, based on American song motifs. And then on his way back to Europe, he appeared in Cuba. On the 1st of December 1874, he travelled with his family to Brussels, where the family set up their permanent home. He had received an invitation from the director of the Brussels Conservatoire, François-Auguste Guevard, to take over the job of professor of the violin class from Henri Vieuxtemps, who was afflicted by paralysis of the arms. Wieniawski took over his friend's professorship, which had now expanded to include a chamber music class. In 1876 he toured Germany, Warsaw, London and Manchester. An example of the high regard in which Wieniawski was held is shown by King Leopold II's bestowal upon him of an important decoration. And the famous Belgian violinist Eugène Issei was one of Wieniawski's private pupils in Brussels. That autumn in London, Wieniawski fell seriously ill and several newspapers even carried notices of his death. The illness finally forced him to apply for a year off in order to rescue his health. Despite his worsening state, Wieniawski continued to give more and more concerts. In 1877 he gave concerts in Geneva, Lausanne and Montreux. Then in Germany, in Baden-Baden, Frankfurt am Main, Leipzig, amongst others. Here, Wieniawski's deteriorating heart condition flared up. Despite his agonizing illness, Wieniawski set off for Scandinavia. In January 1878 he appeared with Camille Saint-Saëns in Schwerin and gave a dozen or so concerts in Holland. In November 1878, Wieniawski arrived in Berlin to give several concerts at the Kroll Theatre. The first of these, on the 11th November, ended in tragedy. Wieniawski collapsed on stage while playing his own concerto in D minor. Ignoring this ominous health warning, over the next few days he made a few more concert appearances before embarking on yet another tour. In Poznan, other locations in Poland, Vilnius, Minsk and Moscow. At the turn of 1879 he fulfilled several more engagements. At a concert on the 27th of December, Wieniawski gave the premiere of his violin concerto in A minor, the only surviving traces of which are the programme notes and various reviews. His health took a downward spiral. During the last few weeks of his life, Wieniawski was looked after at the palatial home of Nadezhda von Meck, a famous patroness of the arts. She provided Wieniawski with considerate and thorough care and secured for him the very best doctors. Wieniawski's wife Isabella travelled from Brussels to be with her husband, bringing their eldest son with her. When Wieniawski's health started to show signs of improvement, suddenly there was a crisis, and he died at 8 p.m. on the 31st of March 1880, only a few months before his 45th birthday. In April 1880, the city of Moscow said its final farewell to the artist with a solemn mass, and Warsaw did the same 4 days later. Huge crowds thronged Warsaw's Church of the Holy Cross, which rang with the sound of Polish music. In the afternoon, the funeral cortege made its way to Warsaw's Powązki Cemetery. On his final journey, the artist was accompanied by a 40,000-strong crowd of admirers. As a violinist, Wieniawski was admired for his rich, warm tone, glowing temperament and perfect technique. His own compositions for violin are romantic in style and were intended to display his virtuosity. Leopold Auer mentions that Wieniawski was a captivating conversationalist with an unusually rich stock of jokes and anecdotes. Wieniawski felt equally at home with concert audiences, chance acquaintances, friends, or even with royalty, who showered him with high honours and orders. This royalty included Princess Saxon-Meiningen, the Grand Prince of Bavaria, the Kings of Prussia and the Netherlands, the Kings of Denmark, Sweden and Belgium, and the Tsar of Russia. Wieniawski can be remembered as one of the most celebrated violinists of the 19th century. Music lovers regarded him as the reincarnation of Niccolò Paganini, a composer whose works have stood the test of time and have featured prominently in the literature of the violin and in the repertoire of many leading violinists. He was also a teacher at 2 of Europe's celebrated music academies. Finally, he is remembered as an exciting and flamboyant personality. He was distinguished by brilliant intelligence, fine manners, original lifestyle and charming disposition. He radiated an unusually good humour and was an incomparably fine storyteller, the life and soul of the party. Wieniawski was also not indifferent to the fate of the poor and those whom life had wronged. His compassion revealed itself in the numerous philanthropic concerts for which he played and the charity that he gave to the poor and to artists in need. At the same time, Wieniawski also had a reckless side, the most obvious example being his addiction to gambling. The bulk of the huge fees that he received for his concerts were squandered at the roulette wheel. 3 of Wieniawski's daughters, Isabella, Henryka and Irina, went on to have their own families. Their descendants apparently now are scattered all around the world in Great Britain, the USA and Canada. The youngest daughter, Irina, was the only one of the children to carry on the musical tradition of her father. Under the pseudonym of Podolski, she composed works for solo piano, violin and piano, and above all songs. The best known of her songs were composed to lyrics by the French poet Paul Verlaine. Wieniawski's works have been published by nearly 80 publishing houses of Europe and the USA, and the number of issues approximates 600. His music has been recorded by the greatest virtuosi of the violin. The Henryk Wieniawski Musical Society in Poznan pursues the broadest range of activities. From 1952, Poznan has played host to the oldest violin competition in the world, the International Henryk Wieniawski Competition, inaugurated in Warsaw in 1935. In 1956 and 1957, the competition expanded to include violin making and composition. Poznan's Museum of Musical Instruments has over 3,000 items, 500 of which are part of the museum's permanent exhibition. Among the interesting musical instruments in the museum's collection is a violin which used to be owned by Henryk Wieniawski.